Hello, and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
And welcome to the show. Today we're going to talk about amusement parks. But before we do it, as always, please like, subscribe, share, comment. We really want to hear what you have to say. Some of the best ways to reach us are on Facebook or at our website, which is Chris and Randall, Arts and Entertainment with chrisandrandall.com.
No, you got it, Chris. chrisandrandall.com.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Randall. I'm trying to wing it right now because there's some background noise where Randall is, but hopefully that won't be for too long. So here's something that I came across the other day in the news, and it really got me to thinking. So NBC Universal reported that its theme park business returned to profitability in its most recent quarter, and that its attendance at the Universal theme park in Orlando has nearly returned to 2019 pre-pandemic levels. Basically, this is also true for Disney and a lot of other parks. Even in the midst of the second year of the pandemic, well, now we have vaccines, now we have testing, people have gone back to the amusement parks, and they have returned to the amusement parks in a way that they have not to movie theaters or concerts or sporting events. Of all the entertainment activities that you could do, especially of all the entertainment activities you can do outdoors, the amusement parks, the theme parks, this is where Americans have been able to go right back as if it never happened. And it got me to think, well, we never really talk about it on the show, the arts and entertainment of amusement parks and theme parks, and why we go and why we love them, and what does it say about us as a society, as both from an entertaining perspective and also from an artistic perspective, how it is a work of art. So we're going to cover all of that today. But let's first start with just a brief history of the amusement park. So, Randall, amusement parks evolved from European fairs, pleasure gardens, and large picnic areas, which were created for people's recreations.
One of the original was what, Tivoli Gardens?
Yeah.
I think I've been there.
Right.
Like when I was on a trip.
The oldest, what was that like, Tivoli Gardens?
Well, it's underwhelming compared to Disneyland, but you can see the roots.
Right, and that goes back a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And in as far as an amusement park in the modern sense, or just even in a historical sense, the oldest official amusement park opened up here in the United States at Lake Compounce in Connecticut. It opened in 1846. At the time, the park just had a public swimming pool, rowing on a lake, a gazebo for lakeside band concerts, and just a handful of rides. But it did success as what they called a picnic park throughout the post-Civil War era, when more parks, resort parks, start to really pick up. Now, one of the seminal events in the 19th century was the concept of the fixed park for amusement. And that comes into fruition during the First World's Fair of 1851 with the construction of the landmark Crystal Palace in London, England. Unfortunately, that was destroyed many years ago, but Google it. Have you seen the images of the Crystal Palace?
Yeah, I've looked at it, yeah. It's beautiful.
In many ways, you can kind of see how Disneyland and a lot of our parks have that same similarity of glass and wonder, technology and modernity. The purpose of that World Fair was to celebrate the industrial achievements of the nations of the world. It was designed to educate and entertain visitors. This is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and it's to kind of show what's amazing about it.
Yeah, this is almost a totally different subject, but yeah, starting with the Industrial Revolution, there were all these World's Fairs that were had all over the world. These different cities had, right, Chris? You read about it, right? And
yeah, in fact, the most important one actually isn't even that. It's the World's Fair Columbia Exposition of 1893 in Chicago, which is really what we consider to be the early precursor of the modern amusement park. What happened was the planners, when they built this particular World's Fair, deliberately included what was called a dedicated amusement concessions area, which they called the Midway. I'm going to screw up the French, Plaisance. And the Midway, introduced at the Columbian Exposition, would become what we call like the standard of amusement parks. It contained not only rides like the first steel Ferris wheel, but concessions and entertainments like shooting galleries, penny arcade, games of chance, shows. 3 years later, the first amusement park in England was opened in 1896. It was called the Blackpool, get this, I love this title, Randall, the Blackpool Pleasure Beach. And only a few years later, in 1904, it featured such things as, get this, and this is what it would have been like if we had gone there in 1904. Sir Hiram's Maxim's captive flying machine. He had designed this early aircraft powered by steam engines, and guess what? They didn't work. So he had them become a pleasure ride that revolved around a central pylon, which we've done. We still do something like that today. This is another great ride. The Grotto, which was a fantasy ride, rivers, caves, a scenic railway, water chutes, and tobogganing tower. So this is the beginning of what they call in America as well, thanks to the Industrial Revolution and the end of the Civil War. They call this area the Gilded Age, which kind of comes into fruition around the 1880s. And this is when many Americans start working fewer hours with newfound money and time to spend on leisure activities. I think we talked about Veblen and the theory of the leisure class. Is this
Thorsten Veblen, theory of the leisure class? Yeah. What about it? How does that apply, Chris?
Does it apply? I just wanted to ask you. This period of American affluence when people are starting to have time and money to spend on leisure activities.
Well, we're getting into the class analysis of amusement parks really fast, aren't we, Chris? But yeah,
I don't want to get into the class analysis. I just wanted to explain that the concept of leisure as an activity.
Well, leisure, Veblen might say leisure is a form of social status. It's a signal that you have high social status. The more leisure you can provide yourself and your family, your wife.
Okay, good. Well, in that case, we'll get to the Veblen in a little while, because this is the most democratic period when the most common working man and working woman had extra money and extra time. So in the early 1900s, hundreds of amusement parks were operating in the United States and Canada. Trolley parks stood outside many cities. Parks like Atlanta's Ponce de Leon, which I just went to, they would take you on a trolley. At the end of this trolley ride, you'd be at a picnic ground that would often include like rides like the giant swing, carousels, which really to me are one of the great 19th century rides no one ever talks about, and Shoot the Chutes. These amusement parks were often based on nationally known parks of the world fairs, so they give them names like the Luna Park. And this is considered really the golden age of parks. It ends at the end of the 1920s during the Great Depression. A park we'll talk about later was built in that period. So that's like the old, classic Americana amusement park that still exists in our fantasies. After World War II, when the beginning of the federal highway system, the baby boom, and again, another moment of new affluence, the first parks emerge called Santa Claus Land in Indiana and Santa's Workshop in Wilmington, New York. And these are, guess what, built around what you guess, Santa Claus, right? Where it's like, it's Christmas every year and you get to meet Santa. And then, of course, in 1955, Walt Disney sees an orange farm and he creates Disneyland, which Uh, you have an interesting. Please explain what was the influence for Disneyland.
Okay, well, I have a little timeline, and I'll expand on it from what I told you last night. But I think you can even trace Disneyland to before the Crossroads of the world, which is what we were talking about last night.
Yeah,
You know, you've heard it. You've been to Clifton's Cafeteria downtown LA, right, Chris? Have
that
you
is
been there?
correct. It's reopening next year.
Right. So Clifton's Cafeteria, he opened it in 1931, his first one. He made like several. But one I think the second one he ever made is going to be reopened, and it's themed throughout. It's a cafeteria, a restaurant, a bar. There's places to sit. It's huge.
It has trees inside.
Right. There's trees. There's stuffed animals. Well, there's like taxidermed animals. Right. They're actual animals that were killed and like stuffed. But yeah, there's like little dioramas everywhere. You're supposed to feel like you're in the forest when you're eating there. So, and the first one I think was called Clifton South Seas or something, and it was it was supposed to make you feel like you're out in the ocean. Jack Kerouac mentioned it in On the Road. I mean, it was significant, I would say, culturally. So Clifton starts as cafeteria in 1931, and then by 1936 you have Bugsy Siegel, who founded
Las Vegas.
Las Vegas, and so Bugsy Siegel, he's like kind of like he's trying to he's interested in making amusement areas. He makes this place which still exists in LA called Crossroads of the World. It looks like a little fairy tale village in the middle of Los Angeles. It's the buildings are like medieval European style peasant villages, and they're made to 1/3 of scale, which is possibly Bugsy Siegel's innovation in this area. So he made these buildings all 1/3 of scale, so that when people walked in, they would feel like little fairy tale creatures lived there or something, right? Or they would feel like much larger. I don't know. I don't know what he was thinking exactly when he dreamt up this place. Siegel wanted to make an amusement park around the Crossroads of the World too, but he ran out of money. And then I think he got bumped off because he was in the mob, right?
Yeah, and Walt Disney was certainly another person who had a vision.
Walt Disney. I read somewhere, and I wish I could remember the source, but Walt Disney was very influenced by Crossroads of the World. So when you go to Disneyland in Anaheim, when you walk in the door, the first thing you see is Main Street USA. And what's Main Street USA? It's a 1/3 scale model of a fantasy traditional United States Main Street, and it's obviously been influenced by Crossroads. Disney has admitted that, I believe.
Yeah, and Walt Disney even liked that restaurant that's in Los Angeles called. We just talked about it last night.
I don't remember, but I will say
the Tam O'Shanter.
Oh, Tam O'Shanter. Yeah, there's this restaurant called Tam O'Shanter in where is it? North Hollywood somewhere.
Actually, no, it's right near Glendale, and it is like an old-timey European. It's like a mythical old-timey European restaurant.
It's got that same fairy tale aesthetic.
Yeah.
Now I want to say, so Crossroads of the World was 1936. In 1940, now here's another.
Well, I only just wanted to point out that Tam O'Shanter was also built pre-Disneyland, and it was Walt Disney's favorite restaurant in LA, which gives you a strong insight into what Walt Disney considered to be a fine dining experience. Not to knock the Tam O'Shanter, it's really good. I'm just saying, but it is like stepping into some sort of fairy tale land.
Right.
Like
so is Clifton, so is Crossroads. But yeah, Tam O'Shanter is a beautiful example of that from that era. So in 1940, that's when we get Walter Knott, founder of Knott's Berry Farm. He starts work on a replica Wild West ghost town at Knott's Berry Farm, which is like the so like at Disneyland, when you walk in the door, you get to Main Street USA. Well, at Knott's Berry Farm, you walk in the door, you step foot into the ghost town, and then the amusement park's built around the ghost town. Now, Walter Knott, he worked as a young man at an actual silver mining Wild West town called Calico, out in the California desert, and so he based his Knott's Berry Farm ghost town. He built it from scratch in Anaheim, but he based it on Calico. And then Walter Knott eventually purchases Calico in 1951, and he turns it into a tourist attraction. And then he donated it to the state. And I just want to say that I forget what I was going to say, Chris. Go ahead.
Okay, well, Knott's Berry Farm is actually a good point because it is also in Anaheim. It was originally just a farm that was so popular with its restaurant that it got a lot of this stuff. And it wasn't until 1968 that the Knott family fenced the farm in and charged an admission for the first time. And that is when it became, and this is where it gets really interesting. So Walt Disney, what his great contribution with Disneyland was to subdivide the amusement park into several different themed areas. Now, Walt Disney did not call Disneyland a theme park. Many people believe, and rightfully so, that just because he didn't call it a theme park doesn't mean it isn't the first theme park. It really is, but it's not the first official theme park. And this is where we get into what I call an area of controversy, because the Knott family opens up Knott's Berry Farm as a theme park in 1968. It'll also be, by the way, where the first Halloween hayride would ever take place. And they call themselves the first theme park, America's first theme park. However, there is a man named Angus Wynn Jr. And in the late 50s, Angus Wynn visited Disneyland, and he was inspired to create an affordable, closer, and larger amusement park that would be filled with fantasy. And he followed in the steps of Disney that had subdivisions within the park that reflected the different lands. Now, what was interesting about him is he forms what's called Six Flags. The first Six Flags is Six Flags Over Texas in 1961. And he starts opening them all over. There's Six Flags over Georgia, Six Flags over St. Louis, Missouri, Florida. He'll buy up the one I used to go to, which we'll talk about in a moment, called Six Flags Great Adventure. So either the Knott family in 68 are the first ones, or the Six Flags are in 61. Either way, what you start seeing with the baby boom in the 60s is this emergence right through to the end of the century of parks coming up all over the United States. Not just, of course, the biggest one to come up would be Disney World in Florida in 1971. Walt Disney would not live to see it, but he had a vision for Disney World called Epcot Center, where people would live and work. Epcot Center was built in 82. It is not Walt's vision, but it is like being inside all the countries of the world. It is much larger. In fact, Disney World is the most visited amusement park in the world, averaging somewhere around 90 million visitors, even now in the midst of COVID. But what you start to see right through there is Disney Hollywood Studios, Disney Animal Kingdom. This just starts to proliferate so that today, Randall, we have 475 amusement parks and theme parks in the US today, ranging from mega parks, such as those operated by Disney and Universal, to regional parks that are operated by large companies, such as Six Flags, that draw customers mostly from areas in which they're located. Says here that according to my research, nearly 116, so back in 2019, pre-COVID, nearly 160 million people visited the top 20 North American theme and amusement parks. The Disney parks in California and Florida alone accounted for more than half, about 90 million of those visitors. So, theme parks really, I mean, yes, we're going to talk about amusement parks tonight, But I think a lot of really what we're going to be talking about today are really theme parks because it's more likely that people who are listening have been to theme parks. But we'll talk about both, and we'll talk about our
Well, I
experience.
think maybe I'll make the point later, but I think there is definitely an aesthetic similarity between just the typical amusement park and the theme parks. I think they're all attempting to do the same thing.
Well, in the modern era, you really don't really see any proper park that isn't really a theme park. Amusement parks right now would be like, you know what it is? If you go to a summer fair that has like a cheap tilt-a-whirl, a cheap roller coaster, it comes up for maybe a weekend or maybe a summer. That's really more of an amusement park. They're almost like a carnival. They're very temporary.
well,
Whereas
before
permanent installations tend to be theme parks.
right. Well, before we move on, I just want to say one more thing about Knott's Berry Farm. I
Okay.
don't think it's a coincidence that Walt Disney opened Disneyland almost next door to Knott's Berry Farm. They're like in the same neighborhood practically. I mean, there is a very obvious influence there, I think.
Well, also, cheap land. Uh,
Well,
cheap arable, cheap warm land. But we'll get to that in a moment. Actually, I did want to talk about our experiences going to amusement park, and I wanted to start by talking about what it was like as a child. When you were a child, did you go to Knott's Berry Farm?
yes, I did.
And what was it like? Not, I just want to talk about not you as a teenager or as an adult. What was that like? I assume you went with your mom and your siblings.
Yeah, my grandfather used to love Knott's Berry Farm too. Yeah, Knott's Berry Farm. My grandfather lived in Buena Park, and
Which is right near Knott's Berry Farm. For
it's
those
near.
of us who are living in Kentucky or Paris, if you could help us to understand where Buena Park is.
Yeah, I think Disneyland is actually in Buena Park, if I remember right. Anyway, or no, maybe it's in Anaheim. Okay, but anyway, Buena Park is very close to both Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm, and yeah, so my grandparents knew the park very well. It started as a chicken diner, and it had the ghost town, and then they had amusement park rides. Yeah, and it used to be something that you could just go visit, like without paying any admission. And then I guess in the '60s they fenced it off. My grandmother told me that the hippies started like just hanging out there all day, and so that's why in '68 I think it was they fenced it off, and they started charging
Well,
admission.
you started going, I guess, in the early 80s, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. Probably in the '80s. Yeah, maybe even earlier than that. I don't know. I could have been much younger.
No, you were born in 75, so
I was born in
figure.
'75. Knott's used to have this one attraction. It was called the parachute drop. It was they took these old World War II era parachutes and they attached them to these metal baskets, and they took you up in the air on cables. This big tower had these cables, and they pulled you up, and they just dropped you, and the parachutes had to slow your fall. I think they got rid of that ride because, like, I heard some accident happened. I don't know the details, but it was. I mean, it was like actually parachuting. I mean, that's like kind of like what Knott's used to be like. There were lots of crazy rides.
Did you go to any other amusement parks when you were not
Sure,
yet a
sure. I went to
teenager? Like,
Disneyland. I mean,
what
my
was that
mother.
like as a child? Yeah. Go
Yeah, my
ahead.
mother grew up in Southern California. I mean, she went to Disneyland soon after it opened as a
Wow.
child. Um, I had friends that had been to Disneyland so many times, they didn't need a map. They knew where everything was. They knew Disneyland like the back of their hand. I wasn't
But
that.
as a child, I'm saying before you got to go off with your buddies.
That's as a child. I'm talking about like as a
Oh
10
wow.
year old. I
Oh
remember.
wow. That's insane.
Yeah, I remember I would go to Disneyland with a friend of mine. He was like around 10. We were around 10 or maybe even younger. And we would just run off and do everything ourselves. And I remember he had this trick where he would just cut in line. He would just say, "Oh," he would just walk to the front of the line because people would assume that we were like looking for our parents,
Mm.
but we weren't. We just go to the front and then get on every ride. I mean, he was evil, but yeah, I mean, we would do stuff like that. We weren't bad though. That was the worst thing we did. Yeah, we knew everything. I mean, as kids, as 10-year-old boys, I think we loved Space Mountain the most.
Makes sense. Yeah. It's
Yeah, I
very
mean, it was
futuristic.
I don't know. I don't know what the kids are like today, but we would go to the park and we'd just run around by ourselves. It was pretty weird. I don't think kids do
So
that today.
for myself, I grew up in New York City, so it's a very different experience. I grew up in the '70s, so people always assume that I went to Coney Island, but I didn't go to Coney Island that much because Coney Island was disgusting. Uh, it really was. It's just disgusting in the '70s. I went twice, and there was an air of. I liked playing all of the games where they would give you things if you won, but most of them were just cons. You could never get anything on a hoop. You could never fire the squirt gun fast enough. I don't know. Maybe because my mom would take me and she was a good-looking woman. Somehow I would always leave with some toy of some kind, but I don't really think I ever won it off of my own skill as much as I think a guy was just trying to make time with my mom. And yeah, I did go. It was only twice I'd been there, and I liked it, but I could tell my mom hated it. The one that we really went to a lot is called Ride Playland, and Ride Playland is from that golden era of amusement parks. It's located in Rye, New York, along the Long Island Sound. It was built in 1928. It was declared in 1987 a National Historical Landmark. It was the only Art Deco amusement park left in the United States. So it was very beautiful. If you've seen the movie Big, when Tom Hanks goes to make that wish, that's where I played it. There's also a Mariah Carey video filmed around that same era called Fantasy, where she's riding the Dragon roller coaster, which is an old wooden roller coaster. That is one of the oldest wooden roller coasters in the country. I remember riding that with my mom, clutching everything under the sun because a wooden roller coaster, it didn't go very high. It goes somewhat high. It doesn't go very fast, but it's so rickety. And I remember, while I'm recounting this with you, I'm balling my hands and fists because the sound it makes, the smell of it, just that you understand how structurally unsound it was. Now, they were an interesting place for Playland because it really was for people from New York and from Westchester. If you lived in Westchester, you were free to enter. If you lived outside of Westchester, you had to pay to go and park there. They did charge you they didn't do a ticket system, but they did like a one price fits all. But I do remember going with my mother, my sister, my grandparents, until we got to the roller coaster moment, which was truly traumatic. I don't really remember the rides as much as I really remember how much fun it was to just wander around the park, especially because it overlooked the beach, especially because it had great food. And not so much because of the rides, but because of the architecture of the place, which I think you see quite a lot of if you go watch Big again, was just so grand and so beautiful that there was something about it that I just found very stirring. Transitioning to the teen years, I do remember going with friends and on class trips to ride Playland. And I remember then when I could do the rides and hang out with buddies. And that was when I actually could win prizes at arcade games and things because I knew how to actually, squirt the squirt gun, and I knew to avoid anything with the hoop bottles. I knew which ones to do. That was a lot of fun. That was cool. I especially remember one day I just let all my friends go off to do whatever it is they were going to do. And I just wandered the park by myself. And I don't know if I had at that point since wandered an amusement park by myself as a teenager. But boy, was that so liberating. how about you? What was it like as a teenager to go to these parks?
I didn't go to these parks that much as a teenager. I mean, growing up in Southern California, it's like you go to these parks. A lot of kids go to these parks many, many times before they're a teenager, and then they're kind of sick of it. I mean,
You're all played out.
yeah, some of the parks have Halloween nights. So Knott's Berry Farm had Knott's Scary Farm for the first time in 1973. They started the Halloween night thing at these amusement parks, and that's a little bit more popular with teenagers. But I didn't even do that. So yeah, as a teenager, I don't even remember a lot of my friends going to these parks as a
Well,
teenager.
I will tell you the big moment for me, and actually I was about 13 when it happened, but it became is that we had a park called Great Adventure. It was actually opened in 1972. A guy named Walter Leroy developed this park in Jackson, New Jersey, which is kind of central New Jersey between Philadelphia and New York City. But it was taken over by Six Flags in 1977. And again, as we've said, even before Six Flags took over, had multiple themes in it, and it had these great rides, and it had the world's tallest Ferris wheel, which I ran. It had a wonderful skyway that you could take across the park, a people mover. And what was amazing about this was it was so modern. It's actually now, not when I went, but it's the second largest park in the world because they've now acquired a safari park as well. But it was a large park, 10 times larger than Ride Playland or Coney Island, and everything was so modern. And when I was in high school, that's really the park you'd go to. Strangely enough, my senior year of high school, they had a terrible fire, and a bunch of high school kids my age died. So probably I avoided the park because parks are not inherently safe. This is one of the things we should have talked about, but especially not in the 80s. So I didn't really go back until my early 20s, but I remember uh, just before I even left to move to LA, I got a car, rented a car. I went with two of my best friends at the time. We went to the park because Batman the Ride had just opened the week before, and we knew we couldn't get into Batman. Do you remember Batman the Ride?
Yeah.
This was one of the most modern, ultra new roller coasters. I didn't have a lot of experience with modern new ultra roller coasters, and it went backwards for a moment. I remember we waited literally 2 hours online, 2 hours online, and the ride itself was less than 2 minutes, like 4 minutes. And I remember the ride was fun, but it taught me a valuable lesson about the roller coaster, which is, there's so many more things we could have done that day. And I remember only a few years later going back, they had at the time in the late 90s, six working roller coasters, which is a lot of roller coasters for a park that's not called Disney World or Disneyland. And we rode every roller coaster. So by that point, I guess they no longer had a particular roller coaster that everybody was dying to get on. It was also, I think, the last time I ever really rode a roller coaster because I remember later that night, my neck really hurt. And I think that was kind of it for me. I think in the late 90s, I remember going and it was fun to hang out with my friends, but the pain of my neck just really, I hate to say it turned me off. Did you go to the amusement park in your late teens or in your early 20s at all?
A little bit. I mean, I remember sometime my high school had a graduation party there.
What was that like?
It wasn't that exciting. I mean, I had one friend, one very good friend, Anthony, who was there, and everybody else I wasn't really good friends with, and we waited in a lot of lines and went on some rides, and it was all right.
It just wasn't the thing for you.
Well, it was. I don't know. We had to drive like a couple hours to get there on a school bus, and then we had to drive a couple hours back. I don't know. It just I don't know. And by that time I had been to Disneyland many times. Let's see. There was My girlfriend got a season pass to Magic Mountain for a while. I mean, this is in my 40s though.
Okay, well, let's talk about that too, because uh, yeah, what was that like in your 40s?
Well, my girlfriend, I guess she didn't really. She comes from Brooklyn,
Yeah, she
so
comes from the Bronx.
the Bronx. I'm sorry. I always mix that up. But she comes from the Bronx, and like she always wants to go to the amusement parks out here, like Six Flags, Magic Mountain, and go on the roller coasters. And she got a season pass. One day we went there early in the morning. We were there. I think they opened at 10, but they let us in a little bit early for some reason. They were cool, and like, so we entered the park like 10 minutes early, and we immediately got on the tram to go to the back, and we went on like like 6 roller coasters in a row without any line. And we totally got concussions. It was horrible.
That is horrible.
We had horrible headaches the rest of the day.
It's funny. I didn't go back to the amusement parks. I think the last time I remember going in my like early, it must have been in my early 30s the last time I went. And then I didn't go for about 10 years, and I went to Disneyland. I'd never been to Disneyland. I was then going with my then current girlfriend. And the rides there are just much lower intensity. So I could do most of them, not all of them, but
Where's that?
Disneyland.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, which we should talk about. So I loved it, and I really fell in love again with amusement parks there. And we got a year-round pass. And I remember when my mom came up to visit, we took her there so she could experience it. And I have to say, everything to me about what I knew about parks changed when I went to Disneyland, because there was so much more going on, and there were different kinds of rides you could do that didn't put paint on your neck. It was just sensorama. Now, at middle age, it's weird because there's a single man. Not saying I had a girlfriend, but we don't have any children. We have no reason to go. We just went because we wanted to get steps in, and it was like a little fun mini vacation once a month that we could do. You literally just came back from working an amusement park. Tell me what that was like.
Yeah, so my day job is a lifeguard, and there's this place in Rancho Mirage. It's the Omni Resort in Rancho Mirage. They have this attraction called the Splashtopia, they call it. It's basically like a lazy river, which is a fake. It's a swimming pool that's shaped like an artificial river. It's quite large. The middle, there's this mountain with 2 water slides, and they need a bunch of lifeguards to man this place. So they have problems staffing lifeguards, so they called my company, and some of us guards got to go out there. It's what was it like? It's not a major amusement park, but it's sort of like something for the people at the resort to do. It's the main attraction at the resort. I was able to go on the water slides. My last day working, I worked there for a week. I was able to go on the water slides. They're pretty good. I've been to water parks before. So Raging Waters is a famous one around here. Water parks are pretty fun, Chris. This one is like more like a really big and fancy swimming pool. When you have kids, little kids especially, you're just looking for stuff you can do as a family, and that's what happens. So like Disneyland is great for that too. You just there's things you can just go and you can hang out as a family, and
were you nervous
just
about
enjoy
COVID,
each other's
or
company?
Did you feel like the protocols were being enforced?
COVID?
Yeah.
Well, the CDC, Chris, has said that like less than 1% of transmission happened outdoors. So I haven't, ever since they said that, which was like a few months ago, I haven't been that concerned about getting COVID from being a lifeguard.
I know that some amusement parks require vaccination. I know that Disney's ordering all of its employees to get vaccinated. And I was just curious, so it sounds like they were being very responsible.
Well, I got vaccinated. I mean, I don't know why some people would not want to get vaccinated, but I'll tell you something about Rancho Mirage. The community is this is a
Which,
community.
for those who aren't from California, Rancho Mirage is part of Palm Springs, which is about 90 miles from Los Angeles. It is a common place for wealthy people in LA to go to get away.
Right, and it's Rancho Mirage is kind of like a right wing kind of place, and they don't require any kind of vaccinations for anything. And I guess Palm Springs is the opposite, and Palm Springs requires vaccinations for everything. So yeah, so there are probably a lot of unvaccinated people there. But again, like I said, the CDC said less than 1% of transmissions happen outdoors. It's not a big deal outdoors. I mean, they've already said that they want people. The county of Los Angeles has said that they want you to wear your mask inside, and they don't care about outside. I mean, that's
So is attendance good?
Well, I was working there when I was working like a couple weeks ago. It's like in the middle of the it's between seasons, so attendance was better than maybe they thought it would be. I mean, maybe you had like, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 people there at a time. I mean, but I think when they're on, they probably have like 100 people there at a time, think more. So I got to go during the downtime.
That's interesting. I think I really want to talk about now, what is it that makes us want to go to these parks?
You want to talk about the aesthetics of the park?
No, the psychological needs. Why do we? What is it? The need?
Well, I
think that it is primarily psychological. Why we, in the middle even of a pandemic, need to go to a park.
Well, I think all these parks, when you're talking about the super themed parks, like you're talking about Disneyland, you're talking
about any park, even just the regular amusement park.
Right.
What is it at its base?
Right. Well, you talk about any of the parks, like Disneyland, or even Clifton's Cafeteria, or Crossroads of the World, or Tam O'Shanter. Well, let me finish my thought, Chris. So you talk about any of these parks. You even talk about like a carnival. Where they have just
but I really want to focus not on anything more than an actual park. I don't mean, why do you need
let me just finish my thought. So you talk about any of these things, even if it's just a collection of rides. I mean, I think they're all trying to move you into a different space. They're trying to take your mind. You're trying to alter your consciousness. In a sense, it's like drugs without the drugs, and you could do that in a physical way by using a crazy roller coaster, or you could do that in a way where you just try to alter the environment so that the environment is completely changed. They're trying to transport you to another place, like Clifton's Cafeteria. Is very similar to that. You walk Disneyland in that sense. So you walk in. It's
not called restaurants. Today's theme is about amusement parks. If we could just stick to, it's so clear to me that even in the face of a pandemic, that there's just something so much, unlike movies or sporting events or anything else that people are still on the fence about. People are really running back to the amusement park, and I think it's because there's something psychologically captivating and alluring. What do you think that is?
They're trying to transport you into a virtual space, whether that be using physical means or aesthetic means.
But do you feel that because we have been kind of trapped in our apartments for the last year and a half, there's even a greater desire now to go to places?
Yeah, possibly. Sure.
I mean, you still can't really travel too much out of the country. So even just to see what places out in the real world look like, but also then there's just to travel to imaginary worlds as well, right? There's this need to break with this constancy of reality. Do you think maybe actually in harder times psychologically, the need for escapism, which we see like in other forms of entertainment, is also true of the amusement park?
Yeah, sure. Of course.
And do you think it's that, some people, they say, would rather live in the past, and some people would rather live in the future. And some people would rather live in a world of make-believe. And I guess depending on where your inclinations lie. Like if you could choose, what would you choose?
Well, I mean, if you're Walt Disney, you create a fake, fictional example of Main Street USA. You make it one third to scale. You make it cute. I mean, if you're Bugsy Siegel, you make fantasy fairy tale village. I mean, I guess everybody has a different idea of where they want to live. I mean, Disneyland has the worlds, and um, yeah, so everybody has a different taste. I mean, as a kid, I did like Tomorrowland the most.
So for you, it's the future, which makes sense when you're a kid. Just like I think when I was in my 40s and I go to Disneyland, I loved going on the Mark Twain, which is this boat ride through like Tom Sawyer stories,
Yeah,
which
Tom Sawyer's Island. That was
because I
fun.
was going back to a mythical past that never was. I was talking to my girlfriend, who's a professor of psychology, and she explains that roller coasters stimulate the amygdala and it produces adrenaline and it produces dopamine so that you can literally, whether you're on a roller coaster or a house of horrors, there's just something that literally gets you high when you go on these rides. So
Right, a
it's
drug.
really, it is literally a drug. And then there's also, if you're on a date and you're with somebody, there's the romance, right? Whether it is the romance of being on a roller coaster, having somebody grab you, or being in a more romantic ride like, uh, I don't know, Tunnel of Love or something. There's something about the environment that if you are dating, you're going there to have a good date.
Yeah, well, it's the classic. You're looking for some kind of thrill during the date experience. Yeah, maybe you're looking to transport you and your date to some fantasy world. Sure.
Yeah, and I think that is kind of what is going on. And then if we just can broaden it out, how is this really part of our cultural experience? I mean, I think in a way, I know obviously we've already talked about how amusement parks are international, they draw people in, but what does it really say about America? Because I feel like, how film was invented in Europe, but America enhanced filmmaking. And of course, now the Chinese are taking over film. And now the Chinese, by the way, are our greatest competitors for amusement park. But what is it about the American experience that we see in the amusement park?
You think there's something? I don't know if there is something uniquely American about the amusement park. I mean,
I
there's
feel
some.
like it reflects how America sees itself.
Well, you can see that in Main Street USA. Sometimes but I don't know if there's something uniquely American about it. I mean, you could definitely see from park to park, or within the certain parks, you can see what Americans are obsessed with from an aesthetic, cultural point of view. But the amusement park in general, I mean, they're everywhere. They're all over the world.
Sure, but
China has
America
them.
dominates this thing, and I think that it's that when we go to amusement parks in this country, there is an amazing amount of the park that is dedicated to the fantasy of the old America or the great America.
Sure. I mean, the Wild West town, the Main Street, even like the future stuff. Sure.
In a faith in capitalism and industrialism, faith in the future, that forward-looking qualities that you see in it. Even if you think about it, the bad aspects of capitalism, right? Most of our amusement parks are built on cheap land. They don't have fair labor practices. They tend to be, even when they're talking about the world that they show that's not America always feels exotic and other, wouldn't you say?
Uh, Maybe I'm not. Well, can you give me an example?
Sure. If you've been on the It's a Small World After All ride,
Okay.
you have been on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah.
don't. They normally have it open, I think, only during the holidays. It was part of a fair, and it features a song. But when you see all the other cultures being portrayed in its. So I've never been to Epcot Center, so I can't speak to Epcot Center. But in Disneyland, when you see it, it is kind of a cartoonish, primitive, overly exoticized view of European and Asian and African cultures.
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, sure. Well, I mean, that's the whole point of Disneyland. They do that with everything. You know, I don't know. Small World has good intentions. You know, people like it. They're trying to make the world smaller. I don't see anything particularly malicious about it. I mean,
it may not be by intent as much as it's by default, but I do think there's something jingoistic and chauvinistic in our American amusement parks. Not just the sense of Americana, but the sense that uh, all other worlds are somehow outside and foreign, or exoticism. But let's talk about roller coaster. Let's talk about amusement park culture. Let's talk about the very interesting common nomenclature. Like there are people who just go to different roller coasters. Again, I remember going to Batman and the line was 2 hours. Have you ever met anybody who's just gone to all the great roller coasters?
like, you mean in the world?
Yeah,
No, no, I haven't. I don't think I know
there
anybody
are
like that.
people who do that, or they ride them for the most amount of times. I mean, actually, it's by no extent that Coney Island also holds, though, at the big hot dog eating contest. There is a sense of extremism, when you look at amusement park culture. So the Disneyland fanatics, certainly you're more into that. You've met those people.
Yeah, sure. I've met people that were into Disneyland. I don't know if I know anybody. Well, I guess I know a couple people maybe that are fairly into Disneyland.
Do they collect the little, souvenirs and the trinkets?
I don't know anybody that's really like a super collector. I mean, I know people that have gotten season passes to Disneyland. People that work for Disney, they go there a lot. Yeah.
It is interesting that when you meet the persons who like I have a friend and he spends a couple $1,000s a year to have the ultimate pass so that he and his family can go anytime they want. They can get on the express line. They get discounts on everything. And there are other people I know who'll just book a hotel in Anaheim or on the park, and they'll just stay there for a weekend or a week. And they'll just spend all their money and time just living and being in that park, full immersion.
Yeah, well, they're trying to get the experience. They're trying to transport themselves to another place. I don't know. I don't know. It might be interesting to interview one of those people because I'm not sure what they're getting out of the park exactly. I mean, maybe do they feel transported the entire time they're there? I mean, do they forget about all the other problems and worries in their life while they're there? I mean, maybe they do. I mean, it's
Such
sort
a
of like
sanitized environment, isn't it? I mean, that's one of the nice things. When you go to Disneyland, no homeless person's going to ask you for money. You're not going to get robbed. You know what everything is and where everything's at. There's really nothing to break the illusion in our bigger parks, is there?
well, there's a lot of people there.
True.
There's a lot of their families.
There's a lot of crowd management we didn't even talk about, but it does seem like a nicer world than the world we live in, right? A more civil, more polite, cleaner. There's
Well, yeah,
almost
I
like
mean,
a
well, that's the whole point
utopian
of charging
society.
admission, so you can keep the riffraff out, right? I mean, they're trying to control the environment as much as possible for the visitors, and you have to have visitors that act appropriately. I mean, you can get kicked out of these parks if you don't act appropriately, obviously.
So that's somewhat part of the utopian vision, is that there's an agreed upon social norms.
Well, we know Walt Disney was a utopian. I mean, he wanted to found a utopian community with Epcot Center, which never got off the ground. But yeah, I mean, Disney had a room at Disneyland that he would sleep in. It was this is Disney lore, right? A lot of people know about it. It's above the fire station. It's the fire station. It's upstairs.
Yeah.
So Disney was literally living there some of the time. He
That
lived
is,
it.
that is, and it's interesting. Walt Disney's idea of a social, a man who, Michael Crichton, I think, was very obsessed with Walt Disney as this kind of madman, god, social order, because he wrote the screenplay for Westworld in the early '70s, which was made into a movie, and then into Future World, and then to an HBO miniseries that just ended, I think, about a year ago. And he also created Jurassic Park, which is just another permutation on Walt Disney and these parks.
Hmm.
Always well in either of these stories. The need to create these immersive worlds built on either nature or technology.
Well, there's always, maybe that's what I pick up at some of these parks myself, but there's always this anxiety when you create something that's too good, that's too perfect. It's like the anxiety people feel with artificial intelligence, with robots, with complicated machines. You're always afraid. Well, what if something goes wrong? What if something horrible happens? What can happen? You're not sure. It's so complicated. Uh,
Yeah, I
mean,
can see that. And there's so much order in the amusement park. It's hard not to sometimes think the dark side of that is a fascist state.
well, they try to hide things from you too. Like if you go on a roller coaster, you don't really know what kind of upkeep it has. You don't really know what the mechanical problems are. I mean, there's a certain degree of anxiety there, I feel.
No, there's a great underside that's not managed the way, really, until COVID, we really didn't know how poorly managed and regulated that actually amusement parks set their own safety standards. It's self-regulated, which is the worst. And I think that is kind of what Crichton was getting at. It's interesting, with the amusement park, it is a lot of cutting edge technology. I mean, I know now that when you go, they use virtual reality, they're using AI, they're very much trying to create worlds that are even more intensive. There's what I call the permutation of the amusement park now. You're seeing them in museums and nature preserves and casinos, which means you've kind of gone back full circle to Bugsy Siegel. You've been to SeaWorld. I've been to the aquarium in Atlanta. They are essentially really there for nature studies and appreciation of the aquatic wildlife, but they're also, in a way, amusement parks. Wouldn't you say that SeaWorld has somewhat of an amusement park or theme park quality to it?
Yeah, SeaWorld San Diego is I don't think it has any rides, but yeah, it's got a theme park quality. I mean, the theme was they're trying to transport you into the world of the sea, and uh, so you can live with the fish. It's effective.
And there are the shows, the dolphin shows. There are, I know when I went to Atlanta's aquarium, not only were there the dolphin shows, but there were this VR thing that you wore that made you feel like you were going undersea. I know they had 3D movies that made you feel like you were going undersea. They're really selling the experience of going. And I think that you see this in experiential marketing, you see this in experiential event activities, but really the amusement park keeps on finding new areas of infecting or being part of the way they're doing entertainment. And you're really seeing, I mean, look, in some sense, movies and literature and all sorts of commercial art has always been the inspiration for amusement parks. But do you ever feel like in Imagineering, now the line between entertainment and amusement parks gets thinner and thinner?
I don't understand the question because Imagineers are the people that make the attractions at amusement parks, right? I mean,
Right. And their ability to take movies now, especially you see this in Universal, but you can see this in Disney, to take movies or Harry Potter Land, which is from books, and recreate them into an interactive game-like experience.
well, they're like the Harry Potter attraction at was it Universal?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an immersive experience. They've recreated the world of Harry Potter in the park. You can walk around. There's Harry Potter. It's the Harry Potter buildings, and it's like virtual reality in real life.
It's exactly what you're saying. I mean, it's making the imaginary world concrete, right? It's like Disney is now taking the Marvel superheroes and the Star Wars characters, and they're putting a life-size Millennium Falcon, or you can now see, Captain America walking down the park.
Right, right.
It's your fantasies come to life, right?
Well, they're trying to they're trying to transport you to a different place, a place that's not where we actually live. The funny thing about it is it's not real. I mean, the Millennium Falcon, when you see the model of the Millennium Falcon, it's not the actual Millennium Falcon, it's not. When they shoot the next Star Wars movie and they need the Millennium Falcon, they're not going to get into that Millennium Falcon and take off and fly to the set. It's not. It just looks like the Millennium Falcon. It's like a, I don't know. See, the idea that Disney wanted to create like a world, an actual community where people actually lived at Epcot, it really shows like what some of these guys are really thinking about, because Disney didn't want just a model. He didn't just want like a diorama. He wanted an actual real place, and then people would visit it and see actual real people living there. So like SeaWorld is actually like kind of a good example of that. Those are actual fish that you're looking at. Yeah, so I mean, I think these parks, if they could make the experience real, they would. And maybe that's where the roller coasters come in, these rides, because the rides, the feeling you have on the rides, the physical sensations, they're real at least. And the rest, like Harry Potter Land's not real, but you get on the roller coaster, you can feel the physical sensation of the roller coaster in the Harry Potter world, and at least that's somewhat real. I don't know. It's like I guess what I'm saying is if they could, it would be 100% real. But
and maybe that is really where the future is going. Would you say, Randall? To find, and then you really see it even with Crichton's books. It's how real can fantasy get? And if fantasy gets real, what does it says about not just how the entertainers entertain us, but what do we want to entertain us as well? Right? There's that kind of weird thing. Are they just simply reflecting back to us our own tastes, or are they telling us what we want to feel?
The entertainers?
It's a symbiotic. The parks, right? In a way, are they setting the standards for what we consider entertaining? Or are they simply playing off of our love of death and destruction, which really is a lot of what parks are really about. It's almost dying, but not dying. It's seeing things blow up, but knowing it's safe. It's being twisted, literally your body flown through the air, but know that as bad as it gets, you're okay, but it's at least bad enough. It does speak, I think, it's very reflective of our own primordial desires, fears, anxieties. And I think that as the technology improves, I can only assume it'll get more so. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, they definitely want as much realism as possible. Yeah, we didn't evolve to be comfortable all the time. I mean, early human existence was we were living on a knife's edge probably most of the time. The kind of comfort we have in the industrialized world is unprecedented. I think a lot of us, we seek some sort of, the thrill seekers, the sensation seekers. They're looking to explore that primitive side of themselves, and there's almost nowhere to do it in the modern world. I mean, roller coasters, I guess, are one of them. These thrill rides are one of those ways.
And I think that when you look at how Las Vegas is getting from being a place of casinos to being more of a place of family fun adventure, and it's investing quite heavily in amusement park esque things, rides, roller coasters, what have you. I cannot help but think that we're seeing the beginning of what I would call more adult oriented amusement parks. The ones that not just deal with your childhood or your teen years or your college years, but really go through the entirety of your life and start to really be more about adult thrills, which I think, without getting too deep, is kind of what Westworld, at least the TV series, is really addressing. Can I kill people? Can I have sex with robots? How far can I take where things are going? And I wonder, was Crichton being very prescient or just being a sensationalist?
Well, it sounds like we were saying he was onto something. I mean, people are trying to explore that the primitive sides of themselves at these amusement parks. I mean, it's very primitive, right? To just throw your body around like a rag doll, and like you said, awaken the amygdala. I mean, that's just a fear response, really.
And there
Uh,
is that thrill that comes with it.
mhm.
Now, I know we really didn't get a chance to talk about the artistry of Imagineering, so I'm just going to tell folks, if you have Disney Plus, there is a wonderful six-part miniseries, documentary miniseries on Imagineering. I think it's literally called uh, The Imagineering Story. We'll put a link to it, or at least I'll give you the proper title to it at the bottom if you're looking at this on YouTube or Facebook. And also, there's a great YouTube channel called Defunct Land, which looks at the history not just of Disney, but of amusement parks all over the world, and talks about how different ones closed or different rides closed and the different histories behind it. I think hopefully you guys will find that very enriching. I'm sure we'll come back to amusement parks again. Randall, what is your, like, I guess, what is the biggest takeaway for you before we end the show?
uh, I don't know. I guess I didn't know we'd get into talking about how maybe amusement parks are trying to help us explore a primitive side of ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that, to me, the biggest takeaway is that in the face of everything, that this should be the thing that snaps back the first, coming out of a pandemic. It really shows me that at the end of the day, the connection between this particular experience of living and dying and transportive qualities, these things of fantasy and curiosity and history, these are the things that really we, at a base level as human beings, we desire the most. And in some sense, it's really almost one of the most purest forms of artistry, which is a big statement to end, I know, an episode on, but we're going to end it right here. So until then, I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
Take care and be well.
Bye.